There's this moment in Season 7, Episode 4 of Game of Thrones, in the midst of one of the big battles where Dany's main dragon, Drogon, sounds dumb out of context but roll with it, is setting fire to the Lannister army, and Bronn, a fan favourite, wisecracking character, very renowned in combat who fights for the Lannisters, uses this anti-Titan weapon the Lannisters had developed. Again, sounds dumb out of context, but roll with it. He fires it up into the oncoming dragon, and the camera follows the arrow up and up into the sky, and it fucking lands. It hits Drogon. And for a second, and only for a hopeful second, you think, holy fuck, Game of Thrones is good again. This is fucking insane, Bronn just killed Drogon, and possibly Dany, before you crash down to earth and come back to your senses, and with your 3 predictive brain cells and awareness of genre and storytelling convention realize that neither of them are dead. Nonetheless, despite this moment not eventuating in Drogon and Dany's deaths, that moment and second of belief was electrifying. More so than about any moment in fiction to me. And the episode then threatens to and basically does create the same experience again, when Jaime charges at the downed Drogon and confused Daenerys with lance in hand, seeking to kill the Dragon Queen right there, only for the moment again to be undermined. But again, that moment and the corresponding second or so of belief that this thing might happen, that Dany might die here, even though my entire understanding of how narratives work and the obvious forward direction of the show is evidence that it can't happen, not here, not now, it is electrifying. That moment is engaging on almost an unparalleled scale. That a show could make you feel something like that, even long after it had jumped the Sansa Ramsay shark, is an accomplishment that cannot go unnoticed to me. I'll warn you, this is not an analysis video or a video essay with a major conclusive point to make. This is merely sort of an observation that I find fascinating, and am trying to understand and get across in hopes that it's identifiable. In the example I just gave, it makes no sense in the story for Daenerys and Drogon to be taken out by either Bronn or Jaime here, outside of a wild, intentionally drastic subversion that this show stopped being notable for back at the Red Wedding. I'm not necessarily advocating in this video for Dany and Drogon to have died here. In fact, this logical observation that it shouldn't have happened here, by all my understandings in convention, might be a core factor in why, for a singular second when I believe it happened, I was awestruck, and why it was so effective. Maybe only by laughing in the face of logic, something this electrifying is possible. I remember watching this episode for the first time. In this moment, I was a wide-eyed moron ready to be swept along with the narrative current. Grizzled, can see the machinations of the narrative a million miles away me. I jumped out of my seat and screamed, and was on the most fuck Dany shit I'd ever been on, and maybe anyone had ever been on. It brought out a deep internal Daenerys hatred in me that I didn't know I had at the time, and that would never subside from that moment onwards, throughout the rest of the run of the show. Book Daenerys seems cool though. This scene did a lot to me, and I'm trying to figure out why. I don't usually react to stories in this way as a grizzled, narrative veteran, and even as a kid I really didn't get swept away in stories this way. Also usually looking at it from a detached viewpoint that I think certainly helps with this thing I do. But sometimes, like in this instance, it's brought out of me, and it's fun. Electrifying even. Is it this chaotic, fuck it, just commit to this one moment and ignore all future planning mindset that electrifies me so? That intrinsically appeals to me enough to make me have a reaction like this to Season 7? Season 7 of Game of Thrones? Is it that a far more likable, at least to me, minor character is presented to unexpectedly triumph over an annoying, at least to me, more boring, far more important character? The idea of Bronn, of all people, killing Drogon and ending Daenerys' invasion was salvation to me, and I don't understand why. It just was. I think perhaps this reaction might be a subconscious realization manifesting in a very surface layer reaction of me mindlessly chanting, "Kill her, kill her, kill her," as the camera follows that bolt, up and up and up. Like, subconsciously, I understand that this is something that seems impossible from a mechanical layer. I've already identified that the mechanisms of the story are building to something beyond this scene for Dany and Drogon. But despite that truth being intrinsic to me, subconsciously you start to realize the narrative might be drifting in another direction. And before you can properly think that, the arrow has already lodged itself into Drogon, and you can't believe it's happening. Your eyes are seeing something they shouldn't be. And before you recognize that everything you held to be true may be being thrown out, you've already reacted subconsciously to the excitement of the unexpected. That manifests in me being immediately on the verge of salvation at the prospect of Dany and Drogon being killed off by Bronn or by Jaime afterwards. And something happening to me while I'm watching this show that I don't immediately understand and couldn't immediately identify the cause of is what made it so special. Since I usually quickly figure out those things, it made such an impact on me that I'm thinking about it nearly 5 years later, and making a video about it. Maybe what I'm trying to say is that subversions are based, and predictability is bad after all. I don't know, but it wasn't even a subversion, it was a tease of a possible subversion that didn't eventuate. Maybe the chaotic element of destroying the forward momentum of the story, and everything the narrative has been building up all this time just to make this specific moment one to remember is tantalizing to me. Maybe chaos is a ladder or something stupid like that. But Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 4 is not the only time a moment in a story has brought this reaction out of me. There's 2 other examples of this phenomena happening to me. A Vinland Saga example and an Attack on Titan example. And I think we can identify some similar elements in those moments that line them up with the Game of Thrones example. And maybe that will help us identify what exactly is going on here. Let's start with Vinland Saga. The climax of Vinland Saga's second arc, the Farmland arc, sees King Canute invading Kettle's farm looking to acquire it to help in his future kingly endeavours of creating a paradise on Earth. The old doing a bad thing for the greater good tale. The Jomsvikings are making short work of Kettle's makeshift army of farmers and unenthusiastic guards defending the farm, and their only hope to outlast the king's attack is Kettle's son, Thorgil, a former Jomsviking in his own right, who seeks to sneak up behind the attacking force and take out Canute single-handedly while he's lightly guarded and vulnerable, to end the war in one fell swoop. He plans to do this by swimming an absurd length and emerge on a stretch of beach behind where Canute is stationed at the rear of the battle. And by God, the monster does it, gets ashore and rushes Canute from behind. And this terrifying panel is upon the reader before they even know what's happening. And again, for a second, and only for a hopeful second, you think, holy fuck, Vinland Saga's even better than I thought it was. I can't believe Thorgil is about to kill Canute. Now, the air isn't immediately blown out of the sails for this moment, because Canute blocks the attack, and that seems to give his guards enough time to kill Thorgil. But the block, because of Thorgil's monstrous strength, breaks Canute's sword, and Thorgil is too good for Canute's guards and decapitates them both with one swing before they can even make their move. Canute then tries some trickery with his cape to escape, but is gut stomped for his troubles, and it looks like nothing is standing between Thorgil and victory, only for Wolf to have realized what's happening and rush back to save his king, losing an eye in the melee, but buying enough time for the rest of the Jomsvikings to scramble to their king's defense, forcing Thorgil to scream a rather distasteful obscenity and be forced to retreat. But again, electrifying. And it made you believe for a second that the impossible was possible. And it all happens so quick that you can't quite process what's going on. Your subconscious want for some wild shit to happen viscerally takes over, and you react accordingly. That one panel will loom over me for the rest of my days. Impeccable stuff. Perhaps my favorite moment in all of Vinland Saga. Again, I'm specifically not advocating for Thorgil to have killed Canute in this scene, because it would almost certainly hurt the narrative and contradict everything Vinland Saga has to say, and Vinland Saga prioritizes itself thematically. Guys like Thorgil do not win in Vinland Saga, not in the long run. But in that moment, in the face of all that, I yearned for the upset, and was in a similar headspace of jumping up and screaming in disbelief, and I've never forgotten how I felt first reading it, which I think is remarkable. And I'd put this moment in the same category as the Bronn, Dany and Drogon moment and the Jaime and Dany moment, as well as the Attack on Titan moment we can get into now. I think you already know what it is. The Attack on Titan example is obviously Gabby decapitating Eren at the end of chapter 119. What a glorious day it was when this chapter dropped. Feminism had won, the SJWs had finally ruined Attack on Titan, and I rejoiced. Eren and Zeke's fated contact loomed large over the world of Attack on Titan, and one queen stood between them and their ambitions, and fired a fateful shot to end chapter 119, with the lasting image being Eren's decapitated head traveling through the air, and for a second, and only for a hopeful second, you think, holy shit, Attack on Titan has outdone itself again, Gabby just forcibly became the protagonist. Like with all our other examples, this doesn't eventuate, and seconds after initially seeing the final double-page spread, we all realized that Eren wasn't actually dead because of the forward direction of the narrative. But again, that 1 second of belief, and the excitement and salvation that came with it, were precious. Eren shouldn't have died here, it would have made the narrative worse. Again, I'm not advocating these moments should have eventuated in the deaths of the characters teased, but making you believe that the impossible was possible for just 1 second, and get me viscerally reacting and screaming is a feat. And these really are the only 3 moments I can say where this happened to me. And they all involve these similar moments of making me believe the impossible was possible for a second, only not to follow through. So there must be something in having salvation in my grasp for a second, and only for a hopeful second, only to take it away that affects me so. If I were to attempt to give this video a conclusion, it would be that these scenes are all remarkable in this sense, because they for a second, and even just for a second, make you believe the impossible in the narrative is possible. And the electrifying feeling reeling off these moments is something I'll never forget. And they are all moments that engage me as a grizzled audience member like I'm a wide-eyed child seeing a story play out for the first time. And that has to mean something, and should go appreciated, I think. Even if these moments don't eventuate. In fact, the fact that they don't eventuate might be why they've affected me so. Plus, I think from a simple execution and construction level, these scenes are immaculate. The shot of the arrow flying up and up into the air, Jamie charging across the shallow waters at Dany, the Thor Galova Canute panel, and the shot of Gabby's resolve in tears and her taking action, are all forever instilled into my mind as simply fantastic moments in all their respective series. So now I turn to my audience and I ask if any of this made sense. If you relate to this phenomenon I'm describing, did these same moments affect you in similar ways? What are other moments from stories that made you feel similarly? And lastly, can you think of examples where you felt this way, but they actually did eventuate? The closest I can think of a moment like this is Levi destroying Zeke, both times, but particularly the first time. And maybe the moment right after Conviction where Guts and Griffith reunite on the Hill of Swords. I remember a very strong visceral reaction out of me when I first read both of those chapters, where I couldn't believe what I was seeing, where the impossible became possible. It seemed to me it was a shoo-in that Eren would face the Beast Titan in the climax of the Return to Shinganshina arc. But then Levi toppled Zeke and I couldn't believe it. It seemed to me that the end of Conviction meant that Guts and Griffith, while now sharing the same plane of existence, would be separated perhaps until the end of the series, only for Griffith to just show up on the Hill of Swords immediately, and for me to be in disbelief, both at the gall of that man and the fact that Berserk would deliver on this highly anticipated reunion so quickly. But I don't know if these moments truly capture what I'm talking about here. Alternatively, I often wonder if I hadn't been spoiled on all the big twists in Game of Thrones, if I would have had this type of reaction to Ned's death or the Red Wedding. Having been spoiled beforehand, these scenes just left me with a massive smile on my face, reveling in the fact that these shows had the balls to pull off these moments, and respecting them for it. Joel's death in The Last of Us Part 2 is like that for me as well. I wasn't spoiled to it beforehand, but when it actually happened, while being affected by the scene in the intended way, namely hating Abby, I came away with a massive smile on my face, reveling in the fact that Naughty Dog had the balls to do it, and went all the way with it, especially when historically they were always criticized for not killing off characters. It didn't really leave me in disbelief though, because if a second game existed, Joel's death seemed like one of the things that almost had to happen. But ultimately, I don't entirely know what's so striking about these scenes to me, but I am curious to keep discovering new media in hopes of having an experience like this again. Because regardless of if I can figure it out specifically or not, these are moments that I love. And that has to mean something, right? Support links in the description below. Thanks.